Elizabeth of York was Henry VIII's mother, and their twisted relationship might explain some of Henry's most disturbing acts, though Elizabeth of York also has her own story. For the most part, she was born to be a political pawn, betrothed 4 times before the age of 20, and if rumors from the time are to be believed, her terrifying uncle Richard III planned on marrying her too. Elizabeth's father died suddenly and mysteriously in 1483. That meant her younger brother was now King Edward V. At least he should have been. Her uncle Richard quickly took the boy to the Tower of London for his protection. Really, he was just separating young Edward from his mother, so she couldn't stop what he had planned. Elizabeth's mother took her and their other siblings and fled to the safety of Westminster Abbey, which became a prison. It wasn't long before Richard came knocking, demanding custody of her other brother. Elizabeth's mother reluctantly gave the boy up, totally unaware that it was the last time she would ever see him alive. Lucky for Elizabeth, her mother came up with a secretive plan to get back at Richard once and for all. She arranged for her daughter to marry Henry Tudor, a young noble exiled in France who had a distant claim to the throne. The deal was brilliant. By marrying Henry, Elizabeth could unite the two houses against a common enemy, Richard III. Henry Tudor had a claim to the throne, but it was extremely weak. Only with Elizabeth by his side, the daughter of the beloved Edward IV, he could hope to win the nobles over. The young royal must have spent many months praying for any way to escape her confinement, and if she stayed, who knows what would have happened. It's widely rumored that Richard III planned on marrying Elizabeth himself, his own niece. Since his wife had failed to produce any heirs so far, he wanted a newer, younger model. Plus, marrying Elizabeth could cement his claim to the throne. If Elizabeth of York thought rotting in a sanctuary was as bad as it could get, she was so wrong. Being forced to marry her treacherous uncle would have been so much worse. But everything changed when Henry Tudor landed in Wales with an army on August 7th, 1485. 2 weeks later, he fought Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Against all odds, the inexperienced Henry defeated the battle-hardened Richard, claiming England's crown by right of conquest. For Elizabeth, this was her wildest dreams come true. Her evil uncle was gone, and she was betrothed to the handsome young Henry, now the new King of England. After several tense months of waiting, Elizabeth and Henry finally tied the knot. It was a joyous day for the young royal, but it meant that her childhood was officially over. Now it was time for her life to begin, but there were so many more trials ahead. Elizabeth and Henry welcomed their first son, Arthur, 8 months after their marriage. His birth brought about celebration for all of England, but especially for the newlyweds. A son meant there was someone to carry on Henry's line. Unfortunately for Elizabeth, motherhood led to devastating heartbreak. In 7 pregnancies, only 4 of her children survived infancy: Arthur, Margaret, Henry, and Mary. Elizabeth clung to these children like her life depended on it, but unfortunately, she could not protect them all. While she was utterly beautiful and clearly very fertile, 2 very appealing traits in a medieval queen, Henry remained distant. Obsessed with proving he was the rightful king on his own merits, he put off crowning his wife for nearly 2 years. Elizabeth was simply the royal consort, not a queen. Finally, in November of 1487, crown touched temples, and Elizabeth of York became the Queen of England. Now she just had to make the cold, calculating man that she'd married come around. But she was up to the task. Henry VII was like a stone, hard and unfeeling, though Elizabeth was not to be deterred. She wore away at his tough exterior and slowly made her husband fall madly in love with her. Her beauty and her personality certainly helped matters, but she quickly proved that she was more than just a pretty face. Though he wanted almost nothing to do with her at first, Henry eventually had to admit that his wife had a lot to offer. After all, he'd spent his youth in France, plotting his rebellion, and knew very little of English court life. Elizabeth, on the other hand, knew the customs like the back of her hand. The uncouth Henry might have alienated all of his new allies had his wife not guided him through the subtleties of the English court. It wasn't long before Henry started lavishing gifts on his wife and children, and he even enjoyed music and dancing, at least in private. Against all odds, Elizabeth had actually succeeded in softening her cold and unfeeling husband. Finally, she could start enjoying the high life, and boy did she. As the king's rule grew more and more secure, Elizabeth got to taste the fruits of her labor. She and her family knew how to throw a party, especially around the holidays. Ledgers show that she got the normally stingy Henry to spend lavishly on imported wine, roasted meat, and live entertainment. But all of that is nothing compared to the craziest gift that he ever bought for her. She ended up getting her own menagerie of wild animals to enjoy, and Henry even spent a fortune to import a lion for her. Add that to the luxurious clothes, fine food, and extravagant palaces. Elizabeth had paid her dues, and now she was getting to live. Unfortunately, life wasn't done throwing her curveballs just yet. This was just the eye of the storm, and things were about to get so much worse. If there was one flaw in Elizabeth's perfect life, it was her mother in law, Lady Margaret Beaufort. Margaret was a hardened battle axe of a woman who'd survived exile and whose scheming had gotten her son England's throne. As you can imagine, she wasn't exactly the kind old mother in law type. For the most part, Elizabeth of York let Margaret dominate politics while she tended to her family. Her children were, after all, growing up before her eyes. Her eldest son Arthur even had to start thinking about marriage. Elizabeth and Henry excitedly prepared a match for their boy, unaware of the horrible tragedy that lay ahead. In November of 1501, Arthur married Catherine of Aragon. After their wedding, the young couple left London for Ludlow Castle, the traditional residence of the Prince of Wales. But they'd only been married for a few months when something went terribly wrong. Both newlyweds suddenly fell horribly ill with an unknown sickness. The only reports state that it was a malign vapor which proceeded from the air. Whatever it was, it struck hard and fast. The last Elizabeth saw of her precious son Arthur, she was waving goodbye to him and his new wife, unaware that she would never see him alive again. Catherine of Aragon managed to survive this mysterious illness, but Arthur wasn't so lucky. He quickly wasted away until he gave his last breath on April 2nd, 1502. He wasn't even 16 years old. To this day, we don't know for sure what it was that killed him, but it didn't matter. Elizabeth had lost her oldest and most beloved child. The grief was devastating, but seeing her husband's heartbreaking reaction made it even worse. Henry VII was said to be a cold and unemotional man, but losing his eldest son completely destroyed him. He broke down in grief, and it fell to Elizabeth to comfort him. Putting on a brave face, she joined him in his rooms and reminded him that God had left him with a son and 2 daughters. She gave Henry a shoulder to cry on, a rock in the ocean of his grief. When he finally calmed down, she retired to her own rooms, but then her true feelings finally exploded to the surface. Elizabeth was strong when her husband needed her, but when she made it back to her own rooms, she crumbled. In a touching twist, her sobs grew so pained that her attendants sent for Henry, who then came and comforted her in turn. They supported each other through their grief, but since life is cruel, they still had to soldier on and begin thinking of their other son, Henry. He was the future king of England now, and they could never have predicted the horror that he would bring. Elizabeth of York was well into her 30s, but losing Arthur drove her to try and give birth once more. Now that Henry was the only remaining son, she wanted another one for insurance. In 1502, she became pregnant for the 7th time. As the child inside her grew, she moved into the royal apartments in the Tower of London, which was the safest place for her. In early 1503, Elizabeth of York gave birth to her 7th and final child, a girl named Catherine. Tragically, the infant only survived for mere days, but at that moment there was no time to grieve. Elizabeth herself had contracted an infection, and she was fighting for her life. Unfortunately, so soon after losing Arthur, she simply didn't have the strength anymore. Elizabeth of York closed her eyes for the last time on her 37th birthday, on February 11th, 1503. The Tudors had weathered many tragedies before, but losing Elizabeth was different. Young Prince Henry was inconsolable, but he was nothing compared to his father. Elizabeth was the only person who could comfort the king when their son had passed away, but now he had absolutely no one. Of course, we can't forget about Catherine of Aragon. Through all this chaos and tragedy, she remained in England, a total stranger and completely alone. Losing Arthur meant that the deal Henry and Elizabeth had struck with Catherine's parents was toast. Henry VII strongly considered marrying Catherine of Aragon himself, despite the fact that she was almost 40 years younger than him. Thankfully, he ended up abandoning that plan, although she did end up marrying his son, the future King Henry VIII, and we know very well how that turned out thanks to the history books. That's right, Elizabeth's second son eventually became the king, but as a boy, he was something of an afterthought. His father paid him almost no mind when he was a child, instead focusing all of his attention on Arthur. Maybe that's why he grew up to be such a monster. Very few historical records of Henry's childhood exist, though one thing we do know is that he really loved his mother. In fact, his devotion to Elizabeth may have explained his most disturbing acts as a grown man. Henry VIII viewed his mother as an angel from heaven, perfect in every way. So when he grew up, he expected nothing less from his wives. No surprise then that they all disappointed him. Each new wife fell short of his mother in his eyes, and most of them paid a terrible price for it. Maybe one reason for Henry's idealistic view of his mother was that she was taken away from him when he was still young. You see, Arthur's demise was just the beginning. The House of Tudor had many more tragedies in store. Elizabeth of York lived through one of the most chaotic and interesting periods in English history, and she was always right at the center of the action. Because of that, she holds a distinction that no other woman has ever claimed. She is the only woman whose father, brother, husband, and son all became kings of England. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.